Hi to all of those who've just joined us for another conversation for this 5-day festival for the Hindu Women's Festival 2021. I'm sure you've seen a great number of conversations over the last 5 days. I mean, actually nearing the end. Uh, Today, I've got with me Dr. Tina Mistry. She's a mother of two based in Birmingham, and she's a clinical psychologist. Just by way of introduction, my name is Bhavin, and I'm based in West London, deputy head teacher. Tina, I'm going to go straight over to you without saying too much necessarily about your background, which I find fascinating. We've talked about this prior to today, and we've had this conversation about the perception of fatherhood. And what does that mean when we think about the notions of femininity and masculinity? But before I get onto that, can you tell us a little bit about not only yourself, but the Another Mother story, this project that I've only recently come to know about?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, I'm a clinical psychologist and I work in private practice. And since becoming a mother myself, what I've seen is a huge gap in representation of ethnic minorities within anything to do with mothering. So, one of the frustrations I had was, where do I go to find information about birth rituals, about and just anything to do with mothering, feeding, whatever? Everything came from a Eurocentric lens. And as much as I had the knowledge of my elders and family members, I wanted to see pictures, or I wanted to see images or descriptions or articles to help me just navigate that space. And there was nothing. And when I went onto social media, it was exactly the same. It was just tumbleweed. And I didn't fit that narrative. And when you are born, as a Hindu or an Indian person within the UK, you are constantly straddling this divide, aren't you? This sense of, okay, I'm 1 minute this thing, and then I'm another minute I'm this other thing. But actually, when you become a mother, you have to combine both of those things, because both those things are essentially who you are. And that's where Another Mother story was born, was really from a frustration point of view. But also, I recognized the wisdom and the value of all of the things that my mom and my mother-in-law were teaching me about. And I just thought, oh my gosh, we need to document this somehow and really help the generations who feel disconnected to their heritage and all their ancestry, to just kind of highlight it and showcase it. So it's really a combination of two things. It's about challenging the things that we struggle with, but also to celebrate the things that we have to celebrate, because they are clearly there and have survived for years and years and years.
Yeah, great, Tina. Just if I've heard you correctly there, are we saying that as a Hindu woman born and bred in the UK, that this is an opportunity for you to understand not only what the West has taught you, but also what your values, the Dharmic values, the Hindu principles, how they're woven into it? Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's nowhere that really allows this discussion to happen, because a lot of my education, and I'll use that word really loosely, has come down from my ancestors, my grandma, my great grandma, and my mother, and vice versa from my mother-in-law's side of the family. So it's come from sort of interpretation, and it constantly is diluted and is shaped ever so slightly depending on who's telling you what version of what. And I'm the type of person which the West has taught me to do, and celebrated the fact that you need to ask questions, be curious, find out why, and when I then put that position to my mom and my mother-in-law, they're just like, well, this is how it was taught and that's how it is, we don't know. So I keep thinking to myself, well, this is a prime opportunity now to help gather that wisdom and pass it on.
So, Tina, just to add to that, is who's your intended audience then? So, this is, I believe, going to be a book in next year, I
It
believe.
is,
Yeah.
yes. So we'll be releasing the book in May 2022. So it
Okay.
will coincide with the date of the week of the Maternal Mental Health Week, which happens every year. And, maternal mental health is something that I'm hugely passionate to talk about, and, help people understand that, mental health and mothering aren't separate things. They happen, they coexist. But sadly, especially within South Asian cultures, we don't talk about this enough, and we need to start to strip away from the taboos. But the other issue that I'm passionate about, which I hope the Another Mother Story platform will do, is to start to help people understand the whys. Why is it that we struggle? Why is it that we feel conflicted? Why is it that we have these issues with bonding, or relationship issues that suddenly come out at this particular vulnerable time when we've just given birth?
And can you give me a precise example? I mean, I think you were alluding to one there, just so
Yeah.
for our viewers. Like I said, I've only come to know of this very recently, and we've had a conversation. The platform, as you say, would do both elements. Think about our upbringing in the United Kingdom vis-a-vis our Dharmic Hindu values. Can you give a precise example for our viewers of that, what that looks like?
Yeah, so I think, when women become mothers, there suddenly is this shift. They become no longer the wife or the daughter-in-law. They become this mother to be. And if you think about, like, Hinduism, we have the Shrimant or the Koro, and there's this huge spotlight and this centering that happens on this woman who is about to give birth to the next generation. And especially within, Hinduism, we have this celebration of ancestry, don't we? We always talk about Pitru, we talk about, that sort of knowledge and wisdom that is passed down,
Yeah.
but also there is this huge celebration of the new generation coming forth. So we hold them very, very closely, and we are very mindful of their upbringing. So we want to pass down all the goodness. So you think about the blessings that happen during this particular ceremony. It's about blessing that unborn child. Now, a lot of women talk about this, but sadly, it's often just left because there is that sort of notion of it's always been like this, it always feels like this. And I think that the conflict often arises for many women when it comes to making decisions, having control over the child's upbringing, because there is a lot of sort of decision making that has to be done during the kind of formative years of the child, in
Yeah.
terms of, right, so what type of rituals we're going to use, or what principles, or how is this child going to be raised, how is it going to be weaned, all these like really small decisions which often women feel like they don't really have much control or say because they aren't equipped with this knowledge. And you're suddenly expected to just follow what other people have said. Now, in the West, we know that that doesn't necessarily happen. What our education system is telling us to do is go and learn and read and, almost internalize this knowledge and take the wisdom that you've collected and make sense of it for yourself, the application of knowledge and theory.
Yeah.
But sadly, we're in this really awkward position where women are now raised to have careers, and they've got these jobs and they're doing all this wonderful stuff, and then suddenly they just have to be told what they have to do in terms of raising a child. And this is where the conflict arises. So many women talk about not having control. Many women talk about feeling very isolated and alone because they can't share these conversations. They can't have the freedom to talk about whether they choose to breastfeed or not, and how actually difficult that is, and how lots of practices may be just shunned because that's not how one family did it over the other. So
So,
this is where we get a lot of struggles, basically.
so just for clarity and for our viewers here, what you're saying is there is your research is ongoing. I appreciate that because the book, as you said, is going to be released in a year's time. So, in amongst the research that you've done thus far, is that suggesting that there are women who are in that conflict now, as they're doing things because their mothers, their mother-in-laws, aunts, grands have told them to, but having brought up in the United Kingdom, they see it slightly differently. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. If you think about, so my prime example, and I have had this conversation with many Hindus, especially Hindu women. 40-day rest period.
Yeah.
It's like Marmite. You either like it or you hate it. I loved it
Can I
because it
just
was,
ask before you move on from your research, because I know women who are family friends who didn't do it.
yeah.
Is that now common, or are you finding it that some do it because they're told to?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a mixture. So you get some people that will be like, okay, I'll just do it because, okay, it's 40-day
Been told.
rest period.
Yeah.
Let's just. our feet up for 40 days or whatever that might look like. But for many women who are born in the West in particular, feel that it's really, well, lockdown is a good example, isn't it, of how we have felt to be cooped up inside our houses, and this is
Good
6 weeks,
analogy.
you know? So for many people, it's a real struggle. And for somebody to say, well, this is how our family does things, you must rest for 6 weeks or whatever, that's really hard. Psychologically, it's really hard.
Yeah,
So, of
yeah.
course, we're going to break away from that. And I think that because of these rituals can feel quite restrictive, there's no sort of flexibility around it, or there's no pure understanding around it. That's where it gets lost. And then you get that conflict, don't you, between, your family, your elders, and yourself. And you feel then hugely isolated because you feel so strongly about something, but you can't really express that.
Yes, yes, yeah. What's been great about this festival, and having watched a number of the conversations over the last few days, is how a number of people have talked about when they dig deeper and look at the history, the philosophy, what some of our scriptures have said, it isn't so black and white. There is this Western notion that it is wrong that we should be doing it. And we're often made to think like that because of our education. But actually, when you look at those Dharmic principles, when you look at that philosophy that stems for thousands of years, there is some worth in much of that, which sometimes we forget because we're conditioned to think it's been a bad thing or a thing not to be done. Am I correct in saying that?
Absolutely. And I think this is the thing with anything as a psychologist, what we're trying to do is remove people from fixed thinking, because that's where we get ourselves into trouble.
Yeah,
We
yeah,
have
yeah.
to shift to more flexible thinking. The word we use is psychological flexibility.
Okay.
If you're able to hold a psychological flexible mindset, then you're going to fare better.
Okay, great. I mean, this is, like I said, phenomenally interesting because, like I said, um, part of some of my personal interest and work is as a teacher. I'm interested in this notion of formal and informal education in the notions of masculinity and femininity. As an Indian Hindu man born in the UK, educated in this country, and what does that look like? And especially as a teacher, what are we saying to the boys and girls that we teach and those that we come across on a day-to-day basis in terms of what is right and wrong in the Western world, and also what our thermic values give us? I just want to shift the conversation slightly to this notion of fatherhood, because I know we've had this conversation. I think it's really powerful. We've talked a lot about what the mums are doing, supposed to be doing, told to do. What role does dad play?
Dad is instrumental in the development of a child. We know this. All the literature points to this, that dads are just as important as mums. And, if you've got a dad that complements a mum, boom, you've got the perfect kind of, conditions for a child to have a good enough upbringing. And this is where often the spotlight on motherhood, it's too extreme. I think that we also need to recognize the value and input of fathers, and how actually, if motherhood is shifting and changing, so is fatherhood. We've had this chat, haven't we, Bhavin, about
Yes.
how actually men are now taking much more of an active role in the rearing of children, and the profound impact that's going to have on children is phenomenal. I've worked in mental health for years, and one of the things I come across a lot of the time is this sort of lack of fatherhood, or lack of that father sort of role. And a lot of the adults who were then children at the time, they may not have fully understood it, but when they come to adulthood and they realize actually dad wasn't around, what dad was just working, or dad was that strict figure that never really spoke, or he never really connected with us. And that is a huge gap there.
So are you finding, based upon the research and your experiences, and I appreciate, like I said, it's ongoing here, that is there almost a divide that the people that you come across, the families that you speak to, they pigeonhole responsibilities as being mum to dad? Are you seeing that shift more so now than ever?
Yeah, it's tricky because COVID, I think, has definitely flipped the lid on it. So
Yes.
we talk about, 1950s parenting, that how dad used to go off with his suitcase off to work. You see this in all the American kind
Yeah.
of sitcoms, right? And mum would be the stay-at-home mum and would do all the kind of homely duties. That now is totally changed. What we're seeing now, especially in this generation, my generation, and the generations that will follow suit, is that dads are taking more of an active role. Women are going out to work and sustaining and managing these careers. So there is this huge sort of blurring of the lines, which is amazing because what children are being exposed to is this concept of you can actually do anything within a given kind of space, you know?
Yeah, yeah,
And for children, that I think is so powerful to learn that we're not confined to a particular role. We can be astronauts, we can be, footballers or
engineers. Yeah,
absolutely. And that for children is hugely liberating. And I can't wait to see what, this next generation of children will turn out to be like, because for them to have that psychological flexibility is just gonna, yeah, you can see, you're starting to see the effects already with this next younger generation who are, climate change activists and just really pushing the boundaries, which is amazing.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Now, just to add to that is, how's that narrative or that research feeding into the Another Mother story? So I know you started this conversation by talking about rituals for Hindu women because of things that they were told by their ancestors. This conversation about fatherhood and the perception of fatherhood, how's that feeding into the Another Mother story, if it is?
Yeah, so at the moment we're focusing on gathering stories, poems,
Nice.
anything in terms of, from a mother female perspective. So our spotlight is on that because there literally is nothing out there. But that's not to say that we're not looking for stories from men or sons or whatever. So it's, I would say that with mothering, fathering comes next to it. You can't talk about a mother without the father. And when we have these conversations of how when you gave birth or whatever, what did your mum do? And then they might touch on, actually my dad was like this. And it's really interesting to see the differing styles as well that comes through in people's writing.
Okay.
So I'll be curious to see how this does evolve, but I think that maybe one of the future projects is to look at fatherhood
Right.
within the parenting spectrum of South Asian families. But this is still very new, so yeah, I
And
can't wait.
Tina, I like your frankness actually. Let's be honest here. If it's a focus on women because it's a new project, it's that so should it be? This whole thing, this
Yeah,
discussion that we need to involve men in it. And I agree, as someone who's contributing to Beyond the Bindi, the anthology that will explore an array of issues within Hindu dharmic values. But what you're saying is those notions of motherhood, those rituals that are pertain just to Hindu women, then allow it just to be about Hindu women because your next project could then involve fathers. And I think there's nothing wrong in saying that, is there?
no, no, it's an evolving thing, and I think that people like yourself who are interested in this, who are interested in the role and the responsibility of men within just the realm of parenting or the realm of kind of development of kind of Hinduism. It's powerful because what you're saying is that we're willing to explore this. It's
Yes.
not about kind of having it set in stone. It's about just being playful and explorative. So yeah, I can't wait to start having these conversations with dads
Yeah.
because they're often left out, and I want to include them in the conversation, of
Yeah.
course.
And just to add to that, we've said this before, isn't it? This conversation about dads and mothers is about experience. The lived experience is the one that determines action. However, and as the conversations of the last 5 days have shown, is when you dig a little bit deeper and look at some of our scriptures, some of our writings, some of our philosophies, it isn't so black and white. It isn't him to her, as is told to us. And I reiterate the point because I think it's such a powerful one. When you look at philosophies around the world, the dharmic one, there is the notion of femininity right from the outset, which isn't always the case in other areas.
Absolutely, and it's for me. We need to celebrate that. We need to talk about that. We need to put it out there and show what does that now. How does that now translate to the modern couple, the modern family?
Yeah,
We
yeah,
need
yeah,
to explore that because then, if we can start to help people to make sense of that, that's going to then internalize in their parenting.
yeah.
And
Tina, whilst
that,
I've got you here, I think it's really important, and our time will allude us shortly, is can you just touch upon the work that you do, especially with mental health, and especially in the current climate of COVID, but also in general about the conversation in South Asian cultures in general, I don't know, Hindu homes in particular. What's that showing you? What's your research telling you?
yeah, so majority of my caseload usually revolves around identity. And they might not say I'm struggling with my identity, but what you'll find is that they'll kind of present with the symptoms like anxiety or depression, which is our most common symptoms. And then when we start to unpack that, there's a lot of what I would class as trauma and intergenerational trauma that is kind of threaded and interwoven within the stories that they are talking about. And that's what I'm always listening for, is the story. What is the story behind these symptoms? And when you start to put that story in front of them and kind of pinpoint these specific moments in their life, so your dad left your family home in India to move to East Africa and he was only 15. Wow, okay, I wonder what that was like. What did he have to be? What did he have to be in order to survive? And a lot of our stories, especially of migration, is about survival. And what happens when we're in survival mode? We shut down our ability to be open, to be flexible. We have to become extremely rigid. We have to protect ourselves. And this is exactly what COVID and lockdown and the pandemic has done to us. Is it's made us very rigid, and we have to, because it is our survival mechanism kicking into place. We have to do this. We have to get our heads down and focus on what needs to get done. We need to survive. And that's why you're seeing such an array of symptoms within people, psychological experiences. Some people are experiencing extreme anxiety, some people are becoming extremely depressed because of the restrictions that are being placed onto us, because of the lack of control many people feel. So this is how it all translates.
Sorry to interrupt there. So is some of this feeding into the Another Mother story as well?
Some of it is, yes. So we're getting a kind of mixture of stories. So we're getting stories of women who had a difficult experience or a challenging experience way, way long ago, and they're now ready to write about it. We've got a couple of stories which are very heavily intertwined as to how COVID has impacted them. And that's really fascinating because we have to look at these with a very different lens in terms of how a very challenging time, a global pandemic, has shaped them. And we forget actually that our parents, our grandparents had gone through these really huge events like
Yeah,
partition, like migration, like being, becoming refugees from one country to another. So actually, this stuff is within our blood, isn't it? That
yeah,
that sort of constant survival,
yeah.
and now it's been played out again. And yeah, it'll be interesting to see what how people start to make sense of that.
Brilliant. But Tina, time has eluded us, and we could spend another hour or two talking about this. And like I said, we probably just scratched the surface of a number of elements. So just for our viewers, the conversation that we had prior to this was having this notion of your project, the Another Mother story, and when that evolves, then weaving into this notion of fatherhood and perception of fatherhood. And based upon what you've said, I've asked about mental health because not only do I think it's important and those conversations should be kept alive, part of your research at the moment is obviously heavily weighted towards that because of COVID.
Yeah.
Yeah. Look, it's been phenomenal. Thank you for the last 20, 25 minutes. To our viewers, like I said, thank you so much for not only tuning in, but I hope the last 5 days with an array of conversations with different people, thought leaders, people like Tina, who are doing an incredible amount of work. So let's continue these conversations. Let's tap into each other's thinking processes, and let's continue doing exactly what we're doing in educating others. Have a good day. Thank you, Tina.
Thank you.